Welcome back to Refit and Sail. In this video we're going to be servicing some winches. I've got Lewmar Evo winches on my boat which I haven't serviced since I fitted them. So I actually did the 50s the other day. I tried to record it and I didn't press the record button, so I'm having another go using the 30s that are here. So why do you want to service your winches? Well, they're expensive pieces of kit, so it's always worth looking after stuff rather than having it wear out. They're filled with grease, or maybe not filled with grease, but they're certainly lined with grease on all the bearings, so that can pick up dirt and contaminants, and as those contaminants get into the grease, it can kind of turn into a slightly abrasive paste, and that will wear out the internals of your winch. Also, the grease goes hard over time, so you want to put fresh grease in there, but ideally you need to give them a really good thorough clean first, although as a stopgap you can just dab a bit of grease on the bearings and bits and pieces, but ideally you strip them and rebuild them. So these are Lewmar Evo winches, and I'm hoping that I can get both my spinnaker winches done. They're actually not just from a spinnaker, so this is for my main halyard as well as the spinnaker sheet. Its opposite number on the other side is the furling line winch. So what do you need to do a winch service? Well, I've got a plastic bucket here and I've got some solvent in it. Gloves are a good idea. Little screwdriver and a toothbrush or similar, just to help really give them a good clean. The sun's coming out, I need my specs. So on the Lewmar Ocean and the Lewmar Evo, there's a little top ring to take off. It's a little plastic retainer. On the Ocean models it's metal, so generally that doesn't need a lot of cleaning, so I'll put that to one side. Then you have the stripper ring, which just wiggles off. You can locate it in lots of different directions using that little locator thing. Then, if you align it correctly, you can lift off the drum, revealing bearings and various spacers and other bits and bobs that we'll get to as we go. So I like to clean as I take things apart, so I'm going to give the outside of the winch a good clean. There's some gear teeth on the inside there, which I'm going to get at with some solvent and my little brush. So what sort of solvent do you want to clean your winches? If I'm perfectly honest with you, the best thing I find is petrol. Probably not the best thing for your hands, so I would definitely wear gloves. It's also worth doing this sort of cleaning in a bucket. I'm actually using a washing up basin, but you want something with high sides, because as you clean it with the little brush, you do have a tendency to flick slightly greasy petrol everywhere. Diesel works. Paraffin I've often used. It's slightly less, well, slightly longer lasting. It doesn't evaporate into the air quite as readily as petrol does. But if you've got some really hard grease, petrol is fantastic. As a solvent, I wouldn't use acetone because that will just disappear in seconds if you're anywhere even remotely warm. Right, that's the inside. Pretty clean. The other thing you're going to need is lots and lots of tissue. and I always make sure I've got a bin close by so I can clean the winch and then chuck the dirty tissue directly into the bin. Giving the inside a good clean with petrol and a brush. I've then cleaned any remaining soft grease off with the tissue, and that is now ready to reassemble. So in the top here is also a serviceable part, but I'm not taking it apart. So this piece here is what holds the rope to make self-tailing work. There's some springs in there because this bottom jaw opens and closes, so you can get different size ropes in it. If that's not working right, you might want to take that apart. Right, next up, there are two little retainers that look like that. Carefully take them out, and then you can take the central piece out. And I'll give them a clean. Unfortunately, it's very hard to show you what I'm doing here, but I'm just, getting the brush into all the little nooks and crannies. Snigger. Giving everything a really good clean. Because you sometimes get tiny little pieces of metal from where it's been working and wearing. So I sometimes get asked, how often should you service your winches? I service a lot of winches for customers. When I was racing a lot, I used to service my winches every year. Some proper high-end race boats will service before a regatta, or at least service maybe the primary winches. It's probably a bit OTT for most people, but it's also on race boats. They sometimes don't use grease. They would just use a little bit of lubricating oil. In fact, some winches, they are designed to be run without grease. So Harken winches have non-lubricated bearings in them, or self-lubricating bearings, so you don't put grease on them. But yeah, on some race boats they'll just put a bit of oil in, and obviously that washes out quite quickly, so they need to service regularly. But once a year is a good thing to aim for, particularly on your primaries if you can. If you can't do it once a year, do it as often as you can. Just gets all the dirt out. It also takes a lot of friction out of the winch. And sometimes, particularly if it's blowing a bit, or if you've got some crew that maps aren't quite as strong as you are, reducing friction is a good idea. I quite enjoy doing winches as well. I have to look up occasionally just to check the camera is looking at what I'm looking at. So as I think I said earlier, I haven't actually serviced these winches before. They come pre-greased from the factory, so in theory you can just kind of chuck them on. Sometimes I'll add a little bit of extra grease or just check them once I've installed them. But my primaries badly needed doing, so I've done them. Annoyingly, the camera stopped recording halfway through, So I'm having a go on these. This is a Lewmar Evo 30 size, and the bigger ones that you can possibly see just behind me, primary winches for the Genoa, they are Lewmar Evo 50. So I'm nearly done on this. These aren't actually that bad at all. I did one customer's boat not long before I left the UK as part of his kind of winter maintenance refit. He brought it over to me and he asked me to do his winches, and I said to him, so when did you last do them? And I won't say his name because I don't want to embarrass the poor bloke. When did you last service your winches? And he kind of looked at me blankly and said, well, I've never done it. And they took absolutely ages to clean, and they were really, really stiff because the grease had gone so hard and was so caked inside the winch. It took quite a bit of soaking, and actually I ended up using a small screwdriver very gently to scrape the grease that had hardened on the inside of the winch. There we go, it's one roller bearing, all nice and clean. Yeah, it took ages to do his winches, but once done, they were like new again. So he was very happy. I dare say I'll have to do his again when I get back, if he brings his boat over to me. Quick tip, just thought of, if you're doing it for the first time, or you're doing it on some different winches, as you take things apart, take a photograph on your phone or whatever, and then you can quickly go back and look at what it should look like. That will make some notes. So what I've got to remember is there's a slightly smaller cog above this cog, so I get that the right way around and I put it back together. Big, small, and the same here, big, small. But it's not always the case. Sometimes it can be the other way around. Right. These gears here are held with a little pin, which I can just very carefully lever up. And I didn't want to do that, but very fortunately I didn't lose any bits. Because what I was about to say was, inside here is the first set of pawls and springs. There's another set in the other set of cogs, which I'll remove in a minute. So you want to very carefully take this apart, because inside you've got these little chaps here. These are the pawls with little diddy springs in them, and it's really easy to lose the springs if you're not careful. Now, the pawls and the springs are kind of a service item. Some people, probably Lewmar, because they sell them, would say that you need to replace your springs every time you service your winch. I don't do that. It's completely unnecessary, in my view. If they're damaged or bent or particularly old, then yeah, that makes sense. But the springs shouldn't get overloaded and therefore shouldn't deform in normal use. So I'm afraid I don't see the point in replacing perfectly good springs. They're not the cheapest thing in the world. And if you service your winches regularly, the pawls shouldn't get damaged either. Perhaps again on a race boat where everything's pushed a little bit harder. I've seen chipped pawls before, damaged pawls, particularly on slightly older winches that have worked hard. Generally speaking, if they're looked after, kind of last forever. Maybe not the springs, but pawls certainly do. So when I'm taking a set of gears apart like this, I'm doing the first set. I generally do them one at a time. So the pawls for this set of gears and the springs will all go back into the same set of gears, so I don't get them mixed up. In theory, they're all absolutely identical, but you know, they might have worn slightly differently between one and the other. So that you know everything's going to be good, the pawls that come out of this set of gears will go back into this set of gears. So there's probably about 1 million videos on YouTube already on how to service winches, so I thought I'd make another one. So I always do a visual inspection as well, just having a quick look round inside everything. No chipped, broken teeth, no massive amounts of wear evident. I mean, there shouldn't be, because these aren't that old. But if there was, spares are available for everything from Lewmar. The service kits with springs and pawls are normally available in chandleries, normally readily available, although the gears themselves, if you needed replacements, would have to be ordered in, I suspect, for your specific winch. I'm sorry if you're getting lots of background noise here, but as I said, it's quite a busy harbour, and also we're on the flight path for the airport, so the airport is about 10 minutes away in a taxi, as I did it yesterday. So I do regularly have planes going over. Clean and dry. One pawl, 2 pawls, one spring. Very easy to lose the springs, although not lost one yet, at least. I've not lost one permanently whilst doing a winch service. There's always a first time. I have dropped them before and had to go searching. They're fiddly little so-and-sos. Oh, the other thing that's worth noting is you'll find you get little spacers like this in, and they do have an orientation. So this one, if you recall, sat on the bottom there. And if you look at the inside, well, you won't show up on camera, but there's a bevel on the inside surface, so it has to go that way around, not that way around. That's because when the winches, the spine of the winches are machined, there's a very slight radius on the inside there, so that has to have a bevel on it so that it's not sitting on that radius. And here comes an aeroplane. taking off. That's a jet. Get a mixture of planes coming to and from here. Some are jets, which are the longer distance ones. You also get smaller planes which go in between the islands. There we go, there's the next set of gears. Do it next to the microphone. And pull this apart in the bucket so that I don't lose anything. One pawl and two pawls. Has to be said, this winch really wasn't that bad. The primaries were getting quite gunky inside. These are in pretty good condition. Spring, two springs, there we go. Here's another tip. If you're going to buy a toothbrush to clean your winches using a solvent, try and get one which doesn't have all this rubber stuff on it, because it just kind of dissolves in the petrol. This must be very boring, because you can't see what I'm doing. You just have to imagine it. Give it a clean. So the question is, has anyone gone by, seen that I'm filming, and you know, done anything obscene with their finger gestures? I'll find out in the edit, I suppose. One. So I haven't got a lot of petrol in there. Probably 3 tablespoons, 4 tablespoons full. You don't need much, and in fact it's better to put a small amount in and then use it until it's dirty, dispose of it, and then put some more in and change it in between winches. Actually still got some grease in between this, but it's going to wipe off on the tissue quite easily. I missed a bit when I was brushing. It's probably why I've got bad teeth in my mouth. I don't brush properly. Here's a tip for you kids. Look after your teeth. You only get one set. And I drink a lot of tea, so mine are probably very tea stained. pawls. 1, 2, springs, number 1 and number 2. That's a little locating pin. Pivots around. So this 30 is almost identical to the 50 that I've got behind me. It's just a small version. I'm just going to move the camera ever so slightly. There you go. So, brush. What I want to do is get down inside there and clean, soften and clean the grease off. Danger is this can spray greasy solvent around the boat. I'll just wait that before it dries. I don't know why I enjoy servicing winches. I've done it since I was little. I used to go sailing with my parents. My dad was a great one for maintenance, which is probably why I picked up so much at an early age. And maybe it reminds me of my, I'm not going to say misspent childhood, but I think it's because it's mechanical as well and they're simple. Doesn't take a huge amount of thought or time. It's a nice little job to do. Something quite nice about taking something mechanical apart, cleaning everything, making it work perfectly. So I think the central bit is cast bronze. It's probably like silicon bronze or something like that. And quite often the drums on winches are bronze. Mine are aluminium because they're lighter weight. You can also get stainless steel ones. Antel makes stainless steel winches which are lovely. They're heavy, but they are beautiful winches. I think most of Harken's winches are aluminium drummed and aluminium centres as well, the newest ones. That's why race boats often have Harken stuff, because it's a bit lighter. Not always. Who else makes winches? Loads of companies. In fact, the most common one's probably Lewmar, Harken, Antel, at least the ones I get to play with. Right, that is ready for reassembly, apart from just going to clean a little bit of grease off the stripper ring. Yes, it's called a stripper ring because it's a ring and it strips the rope off the self-tailing jaw, I suppose it's probably called. But my sun is on, the sun's gone away. wear sunnies a lot because my eyes are quite sensitive to bright light, I find. Right, already this top locating ring thing, or retaining ring, clean. We are all good. So, get rid of the petrol. Bring back my little tray of goodies. And on here, you can see, those are all the gears. So I'm going to reassemble these. This one goes this side. There's the pin. So when reassembling the pawls, you don't use grease, you use oil. So what I do is I get the spring, stick it in the pawl, and my gloves are starting to get a bit knackered, but squeeze the spring, slide the pawl into place, and there you go. Do the other one. And then I will run a little bit of oil on the inside and the outside, and just give it a wiggle just to make sure it's completely covered. At least the bearing surfaces of the pawl are completely covered with oil. There we go. There's actually a tiny bit of grease in there. Dirt or something. Next up, I'm using proper Lewmar grease just because I have some. You don't have to use their branded grease. It needs to be a calcium sulfonate based grease, which you can buy. You don't want to use the wrong grease. So you might have grease if you have a traditional stern gland. You might use grease on that, which you pump in to keep your stern gland from leaking if you have a traditional stern gland. You don't want to use that because it's not designed to take load, I believe. The lubrication of this grease comes from its additives in it, so that's all good. The other thing about greasing is it's very tempting to cover everything in loads of grease, and actually you don't want to do that. You only want a little bit. The more grease you put on, the more you have to take off next time, and it can, particularly as it thickens, kind of clog everything up. So slide that in there, big one on the bottom. A little bit on the pin. Now, I haven't yet put any grease on the teeth, because I tend to do that once it's all assembled, because it's slightly cleaner. It stops me from transferring grease onto myself and everything else. Right, first set of cogs done. Second set to do. Put the spring in there. sometimes I have to think, what's the best way to orientate my fingers to do it so that it doesn't ping off and end up in the harbour. There. 2 pawls back in, give them a bit of oil. And the other one. So again, you can buy Lewmar or Harken branded oil, or you can just buy some lightweight 3-in-1 lubricating oil. You don't need to go as light as sewing machine oil because that's far too light, but you want something lighter than engine oil, although if that's all you've got, then it would probably work. But you can get a lightweight kind of multi-purpose oil. This stuff is made by WD-40 by the looks of it. There's my little diddy screwdriver. Blimey, it's noisy. I have no idea what that is. Something from the place where they store all the shipping containers over the other side. Right, that's oiled. Let's stick a little bit of grease on the bearing surfaces, which is that bit there. Put a bit on the inside, just a tiny amount. The other thing, if you put too much grease in, is you get more friction. And the whole point of doing this is, well, not the whole point. One of the reasons you service your winches is to take or remove as much friction as possible. There we go. Dab dab with the grease. Chuck that in. Big one at the bottom, little one at the top. That can stay there just for a minute. I always put a little bit of grease on the pin before it goes in, so that next time I do it, it will come out easily. Plus it does rotate on that pin. Right, next up, I might stick, no, next up I'll put the central drive cog thing. There's probably a proper name for it. Right, so bit of grease on there. Rub it in. Oh, lovely, greasy, greasy. This time I am going to put some grease on the teeth, because I can't get to this once it's in. There. Right, I'm not going to put the 2 retainers in yet, because if I do, I won't be able to put the roller bearings on, which is the next thing. So I'm going to put a very thin layer of grease on that central piece, put this spacer washer thing on the correct way round, and then again, tiny amount of grease really. Some people use like a little paintbrush to paint the grease on, which ensures you are just painting it on the surface and not loading it up. But if you're careful with how much you put on your finger, you can control how much grease you're putting on. Quite easily. There we go. Right. This tube of grease is starting to get a bit empty. Right. Can you see this? Yes, you can see this. You can't see this side probably. No, you can't. There we go. And last but not least, these two little retainers. Oh. Actually, the grease got a bit excited then and squirted out. One retainer. You have to be so careful when you've got greasy hands and you're handling fiddly little bits of winch. It's so easy to go whoop over the side. Right, I'm going to put a tiny bit of grease on the inside of the drum, so that's the surface that these bearings go on. And I really do mean a tiny bit, because the bearings have got grease on them as well, but just to make sure it's all covered. And then a tiny little bit on the inside. So how much grease have I put on that little bit there? Probably about, if you imagine the size of a small pea, probably about 2 of those to cover all these gears. And even then I'm probably being slightly heavy-handed with the grease. Alright, that slides over the top. Sounds pretty good. Next, a stripper arm. And I've just noticed there's a little bit of damage on the top of that. Oh well, drop another time. How do I normally have that? Oh well, if it's not in the right place, I can move it. at a later date. Sometimes getting this arm back on can be a bit of a bugger because the little things that it locates on move. And then, very last but not least, there's the little plastic screw-on retaining ring, which you just do a kind of finger tight. That is it done. Don't think I got too much muck anywhere. Right. Final test. Time for a cup of tea.